And we're live in 5, 4, 3.
Hello, hello, hello. Are you listening? The King University Department of Theater and Twin City Radio Theater welcomes you to the Dogwood Radio Mystery Theater, coming to you live from the campus of King University. My name is Steve. I'll be your host for the evening. Who do we have here tonight? What is y'all's names?
Steve.
What is y'all's
Steve.
names? What?
No.
Well, then, I would like to thank each and every one of you for coming out tonight. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Steve!
Thank you.
Steve, we've got a show.
Thank you. As I said, my name is Steve, and I will be your host for this evening's presentation of mystery and intrigue. But first, let's get some of those awkward necessities out of the way. In the case of a sudden change in the weather, we shall all relocate back into the protection of the Fine Arts Building to our rear. In case of a more personal emergency, you may relocate yourself into Whitehall, where you can address such matters in privacy. In case of an air raid, follow the sounds of the screaming actors as they relocate themselves and depart the vicinity. Our first offering for your approval tonight is entitled The Dream Baby, an adaptation of a short story written by Olivia Howard Dunbar in 1904. Without further ado, The Dream Baby.
It'll seem a little like dying, won't it?
Rather more like heaven, Agatha. Will you hand me the butter dish, dear? Now, if you're going to regret it, we won't retire at all. It's not too late. We can stop packing. Perhaps we might not get together as a large school next year, but...
Nonsense! I want nothing of the sort. There's no sweeter sorrow than parting with textbooks and kindergarten cubes. Then I haven't the anguish of a schoolroom full of shorn friendships, as you know, dear. Oh, no, I've never been dear teacher. It isn't that. But to me, because I am well and strong, there is, perversely enough, something like humiliation in confessing at 53 that one has hung up one's tools for good. Why, one almost despises oneself.
I don't, Agatha.
I know. It's because you're fortunate enough to be consistently feminine. You appreciate that we are about to enter upon a dignified and harmonious spinsterly event, whose pleasures we have amply earned. Well, so do I, and I naturally want to live up to my opportunities. Only I have rough corners, you know, Emily, and I don't doubt you'll feel them sharper than ever now.
That's something to be proud of, my dear. Most people's corners are worn smooth in the schoolroom.
Poor darling. They did sandpaper you, the little wretches. You always were absurdly soft, Emily. And the schoolroom is no place for softness. I shall never become reconciled to your having missed your pauper background, which, so I've told you often enough, would have been fireside domesticity. Don't talk to me of destiny.
Agatha, have we any more tissue paper?
And indeed, Miss Emily had no wish to talk of destiny. Her lack of interest in a discussion was always indicated by some sweet irrelevance. Agatha, have we any more tissue paper? Serve the purpose. For the week past, the atmosphere in our flat was singularly vibrant. The week, that is, since school closed, with a definite final snap this time. Packing and preparations for our approaching summer in Gloucester had begun. Gloucester with its delights, familiar now these many years of wandering the coast, intelligently admiring sunsets and storms, reading up on neglected Massachusetts history. But with retirement, and this flurry of unaccustomed concerns with finance and, of course, the packing, these in combination imparted on us an extraordinary state of anxiety. Even 12th Street, upon which we lived for years, had a final look, though we were certainly returning from our summer in Gloucester by the 15th of September. What was more natural under these circumstances? That I should have been driven by nerves to frequent caustic comment? Or that Miss Emily would timidly confess that only twice before had she ever been so emotionally torn up by the roots? You must understand that for 25 years we worked side by side. Miss Holt and Miss Vandercoop, classes for young children. Every morning at 8:30 we would approach the schoolroom. Miss Emily, slight, smiling, tranquil, and I, Miss Agatha, older, taller, and to the child's mind infinitely more terrible, Socially as well as professionally, the concept of us was single rather than dual, so quite naturally, we have long ceased thinking of ourselves as divisible, and it seems probable that we will continue on into the golden years of our retirement as Miss Holt and Miss Vandercoop. It's the 8th of September, and we've always gone back to New York on the 15th. I wrote Hotchkiss we were coming then. He asked, you know, about the floors.
I've always fancied that Gloucester must be magical in October. I so love it here. Away from the city, away from it all. We could stay, Agatha. I've often so dreamed of it. We could.
I know. To me, I confess, it seems a little absurd to stay over an extra 6 weeks simply for the idle consideration of the autumn landscape.
Yes, I suppose you are right.
Emily, if you really wish to stay, and what in the world did we retire for if not to do exactly as we please? I'll write Hotchkiss straight away.
No, Agatha. You're right. You're always right. Well, then, it's decided. Let us go back on the 15th.
I applaud 1,000 times our decision in June to do without a maid. Otherwise, I would have found the autumn days at home uncomfortably long. I indulge myself in the riotous pastime of sweeping rooms. It gives purpose to what can seem a purposeless existence. Emily's ladylike hands engage in lighter domestic tasks, but upon returning from Massachusetts, she seems to wear an unspoken heaviness. I confess I, too, feel the pain of exclusion from blackboards and chalk, primers, and the sweet sound of little unreasonable voices. But for Emily, it is as if she mourns her own death. Well, there are certain topics that will never be mentioned between us. I, being the older, more sensible one, have always taken the lead and always felt it my responsibility to protect the younger woman from what? I don't know, certainly not from this unfettered life of retirement we have so longed for. But I fear that Miss Emily might suffer from conditions that I myself have been complicit in bringing about. I've something very odd to tell you. Emily, I dreamed of you last night.
Oh, dear.
Oh, but this was a delightful dream. It was a dream of you and a baby. You've always had a Madonna look, you know, Emily, but there you were, all Madonna. I can see the little thing now with its sensitive wee face. It wasn't more than 6 months old, and a patrician dot of a nose and mysterious blue eyes. And what was most curious was that you seemed to exercise some uncanny maternal spell over it. For when it fretted, you said, "Hush, Vandercoop," and he hushed.
Vandercoop? And I always thought that was such a good name for a boy. But, Agatha, what was the rest of it?
There was nothing else. Or if there was, I failed to realize it. Just you and Vandercoop projected against space. There may, of course, have been some other members of the family, but I didn't see them.
How curious. And he was pretty?
Altogether charming. Not the plump Cupid type. One could fancy him developing into something really distinguished. Oh, I should know him anywhere. It was all so startlingly vivid. It seemed almost like a supernatural realization of what might have been, of what should have been. It was such a very slightly different turn of the wheel, Emily. How we all like to ponder on the ifs.
How soft and sweet they are, aren't they?
What?
Babies, I mean.
Very. Again and again throughout the day, Miss Emily seemed to regard me with a kind of silent eagerness. Though affecting not to take notice, I soon discovered that the impression of my singular dream was strangely slow to fade.
Good morning, Agatha. Did you sleep well, dear?
Not in the least well. A succession of nightmares. And when I'd been dieting, too. It's preposterous.
Why didn't you wake me?
It's precisely what I did. In my sleep. I have passed my night, Emily, in a mad chase after that baby of yours, that Vandercoop. If you will believe me, he fell downstairs before my very eyes.
Oh, Agatha!
But I picked him up, and when I found he was alive, I put him in a hot bath as a restorative. However, he almost drowned himself, for he was so smooth and slippery I couldn't hold him. Emily, I must ask you to give me another cup of coffee and to please make it strong.
And there was no one with him?
Thank you, dear. You reappeared at last, and when you took him in your arms, you both looked so pretty, I couldn't scold either of you.
Was he good when I took him?
Perfectly. Did I tell you, Emily, that the child has beautiful eyes? And one of his dimples corresponds to that one of yours that you ought to have outgrown long ago.
What kind of sound does he make?
Why, something like this.
Of course! How dear he will be when he talks.
Our dream baby began to maintain in our little family's interests a prominence altogether unaccountable. Miss Emily expressed her affectionate absorption by the most significant of omissions. For the first time since I've known her, she neglected her embroidery, and it became her inexplicable habit to sit idle, motionless, for hours at a time. I vowed that I would never dream of Vandercoop again, and forsworn my nightly glass of milk, lest it be responsible for these visitations. But quite in spite of myself, at close, regular intervals, I had further visions of the phantom child who, in his insubstantial fashion, had made himself such an integral part of our lives. The fact that the dreams became increasingly unlike dreams was a matter of serious concern. I am a sensible and clear-headed woman. Dreams with the magnificent incoherence of ordinary familiar dreamland I could tolerate. But visions that dared again and again to shape themselves into so audacious a semblance of reality beset me with terror. I had become far too expert in this uncanny business for my disturbed peace of mind. Vandercoop's development kept pace with the calendar, and his accomplishments, as the months went by, corresponded perfectly with the measure of his existence. It is true that neither of us could have divined this most gratifying fact. We formed the habit of jotting down Vandercoop's progress in a book designed for that purpose that Miss Emily had bought at a department store. We discovered, on comparing notes given in each month in Baby Ways magazine, which Miss Emily promptly subscribed, that there was absolutely nothing to criticize in our little dream baby's development. Though what we should do about it if there was, heaven knows. One day, after coming home from a meeting of the Municipal Government Club, I found Emily sedulously erasing the evidence of tears. I suppose it's that baby again.
He hasn't done anything. I suppose it's him not really belonging to me that I mind so much. And then I might as well tell you, Agatha, that the worst of it is that no one ever had a baby before without being able to make clothes for it.
Hush, hush, dear.
I want to sew him a little dress more than I want anything, Agatha. And you know how beautifully I could make it. I have thought how I should have it out in square, so as to show the exquisite back of his neck. You were telling me yesterday how I loved to kiss him there, Agatha. What should you think of me if I bought, well, perhaps not a dress, but some flannel, just to make him a little jacket, just to please myself?
Emily, I beg of you never to talk in this way again. I blame myself beyond all telling. Please, dear, let us try to forget it all.
Agatha, I want you to promise me something, that you will never keep from me in anything in regard of Vandercoop. It is my right to know everything and at once, so you must not only tell me, but it must be immediately. The next morning, whatever it may be.
Why, yes, dear, I promise. Let me make you some tea. My affection for Emily was ever my line of least resistance, and of course, as always, I succumbed to her requests. Within a few months of Vandercoop's spectral existence, there at times threatened to appear a narrow rift within the close tissue of our friendship. Emily was jealous of my more intimate knowledge of Vandercoop. And why should she not be? How grotesquely cruel that Emily should be obliged to learn secondhand of her infant's physical perfections and delicious waywardness. That Emily should be denied the mere joy of holding her own dream bay in her arms. Early in May, according to my arithmetic, Vandercoop attained the dignity of his first birthday. As promised, I communicated the report of this festival, though with an evident unwillingness.
We will let the china wait a little. Sit down and tell me all about it. What did he say?
He said, "Mama!" and hugged you with that happy little scream of his. And then he laughed mischievously, showing all his cunning little teeth.
5 of them.
And when I tried to find out what pleased him so much, I saw that he was holding tightly under his arm a toy elephant.
Where had he gotten it?
Why, it was one of his birthday presents from you. I think you must have given him a dozen. One was a bay horse harnessed to a cart with real harness and all that. It seemed to delight him particularly.
Boys always loved horses so.
And though I tried to make him come to me, he wouldn't. He stayed with you and cuddled.
What a precious, perfect angel.
And thus was the dream pieced out and every last detail adjusted to its place. At the close, Miss Emily entered faithfully into the book devoted to Vandercoop the full and unabridged accounting of his first birthday. A few days later, the first prolonged heat wave swept over the city. I think we cannot get away too soon, Emily. How fortunate it is we haven't to wait till June to go to Gloucester. What do you think, my dear?
I suppose I might as well say now that I think we cannot go out of town this summer.
But why?
Because of Vandercoop.
Well?
His very existence is exclusively associated with our rooms here. Do you feel confident, Agatha, that if we went away and interrupted our psychic connection with these surroundings, I hardly know how to put it.
I know I should dream of Vandercoop anywhere.
But how do you know? Have you ever been able to control the...
No.
And yet you would venture to...
It would make you unhappy, would it not, Emily? To go away? Very well, then. We will stay. I suppose we would better have a maid in for the summer. During the first month of August came the crisis of the summer's feverish violence. From the whole stricken city seemed to rise continuous, unlovely exhalations of sickness, suffering, and death. Miss Emily yielded to the cruel heat, and for many long days I nursed her faithfully. During one feverish evening, when no night coolness came to bring relief, I spent all my strength in the effort to gain little comfort from my poor Emily. After midnight, completely exhausted, I lay down without undressing and slept till dawn. When I awoke, it was with a cry.
Agatha! Agatha, my dear, you've been screaming. You have been dreaming of Vandercoop, haven't you?
I'm not myself, Emily. It's the heat. It muddles one's head, so I'm really not responsible. I'm not, indeed. Don't talk of it, Emily. Let us wait till another time.
I know. You need not to tell me. He's dead. My baby is dead. What killed him?
Emily, I feel like a murderer. Don't!
What killed him?
Darling, he died from a fever. I think it must have been the heat. We did everything for him. He did not seem to suffer, Emily. Emily, you must not suffer so. It is not too late. Listen, dear. You must wait until I can get a strong sleeping powder from the drugstore. Then I shall take it and let it put me to sleep, and I shall dream... Oh, of course I shall dream him back again. I know, Emily, that this was not a true dream. You see, dear, the heat and all.
And could that comfort me? That you should dream a lying dream? What are you doing to me, Agatha? Why should you want to lie to me now, when my baby is dead?
Emily, where are you going?
Why, I'm going to get some flowers. For my baby.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. That was The Dream Baby. Tonight, the role of Agatha was portrayed by Josie Gunn. The role of Emily was portrayed by Emily Brown. Sound effects were supplied by Rebecca Rowe. Let's give them all another great big Dogwood Radio Mystery Theater round of applause. If you are just tuning in, you are listening to the Dogwood Radio Mystery Theater coming to you live from the campus of King University. Excuse me, I have just been handed this announcement from the Dean of Students. Effective immediately, male students are no longer allowed into the women's dormitories. And conversely, female students are no longer allowed in the men's dormitories. If caught, there is to be a fine levied against the offender. First offense shall be $1. Second offense shall be $5. Third offense shall be $15. What's that, Luke? No, I do not see a price for a season pass. Next, for your listening pleasure, will be The Dead Wagon, adopted from a short story written by Gray Lespina and first published in Weird Tales magazine, September 1927. I give you The Dream Wagon. Sorry, The Dead Wagon.
Someone's been chalking up the front door.
Chalking? The great door?
Oh, nothing that can do any harm to the carving. Perhaps I'm mistaken. It's coming on dusk, but it seemed to be a great cross in red, chalked high up on the top panel of the door. You know, the Great Plague panel.
Good God. Did you notice anything else besides the cross?
I don't think there was anything else. Of course, I didn't look particularly. I had no idea you'd be so interested.
I think I shall go out and take a look at it myself. You may have imagined you saw some things in the dusk.
May I come?
I suppose. You'll have to hear the whole story sooner or later.
The Melverson Door is well known in the annals of historic carvings. There is a large lower panel depicting the Great Fire of London. Above this are 6 panels portraying other important events in London's history. And running across the very top is a large panel showing a London street during the Great Plague of 1664. The panel shows houses on either side of a narrow, yawning street, each with crosses upon their doors. In the foreground is a rude wooden cart piled high with bodies, drawn by a lean nag and driven by a saturnine figure with a leering face. A few moments later, we were staring in astonishment at the famous carved door that was the primary entrance to the abbey. I swear, no one could have approached the door without being seen from the library window. Yet, in the seconds that lapsed between my first observation and this one, an addition had been made in red chalk marks.
Read it to me, Kenneth.
God have mercy upon us. What does it mean?
You have heard the story. This is some thoughtless jest of yours. Tell me it is, my boy. Tell me that your hand traced these fatal words.
Sorry, sir, but I found the red cross just as I told you. As for the writing below, I must admit...
then you put that there. It was you who did it then. Thank God, thank God.
No, I hadn't finished. I was only wondering how anyone could have slipped past us and written this unseen. I'm sure there was nothing here but the red cross when I told you about it first, sir.
Then you haven't heard. No one has told you that old legend, the story of the Melverson curse.
This is the first I've heard of it, I assure you.
And you positively deny writing that, even as a bit of a joke?
Come, sir, it's not like you to accuse me of such a cheap piece of trickery.
Forgive me, boy. I should not have said that, but I am agitated. Will you tell me, look closely, for God's sake, Kenneth, how many bodies are there in the wagon?
There are 11 bodies.
Kenneth, look carefully. More depends upon your reply than you can be aware. Are you sure there are only 11?
There are only 11, sir. I'm positive of it.
Thank God. Then there is still time. Let us return to the house, my boy.
Once back in the library, Lord Melverson collapsed into the nearest chair, his breath coming in short, forced jerks. I poured him a glass of water and called for his man Jennings. Jennings!
Jennings!
After a moment, the butler came into the room. At sight of Lord Melverson in such a condition, the gray-haired servant was galvanized into action. He flew across the room to the desk, opened a drawer, picked up a bottle, shook a tablet out into his hand, flew back and administered the medicine to his master.
Thank you, Jennings. Send one of the men out to clean the upper panel of the front door, Jennings.
It isn't the Red Cross, my lord. Oh, no, it cannot be the Red Cross.
It seems to be a cross chalked in red.
Oh, my lord, not the Red Cross. And was the warning there? Yes. Did you count them? How many were there?
Same as before, Jennings. That is all as yet.
Yes, my lord.
Kenneth,
Yes, sir.
I presume you are wondering over the to-do about a chalk mark on my door. Well, it made me think of an old family tradition and disturbed me a little. There's just one thing I want to ask you, my boy. Arlene must not know that I had this little attack of heart failure. I've kept it from her for years, and I don't want her disturbed about me. And, Kenneth, my daughter has never been told the family legend, so don't tell Arlene about the cross, the chalk mark on the door. I have your word, my boy. Thank you. Someday I'll tell you the whole story.
Has it anything to do with the quaint verse in raised gilded letters above the fireplace in the dining hall? Melverson's firstborn will die early away. Melverson's daughters will wed in gray. Melverson's curse must Melverson pay, or Melverson Abbey will ownerless stay. Woo!
Sounds like doggerel, doesn't it, Plaid? Well, that's the ancient curse. Foolish. Perhaps it is. Perhaps it is. Yet I am his second son myself. My brother Guy died before his majority.
Coincidence, don't you think, sir?
Possibly, but a chain of coincidences, then. You don't believe there could be anything in it, do you, Kenneth? Would you marry the daughter of a house with such a curse on it? Knowing that it was part of your wife's dowry, knowing that your firstborn son must die before his majority.
I don't think I'd care to answer such a supposititious question, sir. I can't admit such a possibility. I'm far too matter-of-fact, you see.
But would you?
I don't believe a word of it. It's just one of those foolish superstitions that people have permitted to influence them from time immemorial. I refuse to credit it.
Hardly worth to go over the old tradition, is it? You wouldn't believe it anyway, and probably it is just superstition, like you say. Ring for Jennings again, please, will you? Or do you want to lend me your arm, my boy? I feel a bit shaky yet. I think bed would be the best place for me.
After bidding Lord Melverson good night, I got out my pipe and sat by the window smoking. Tomorrow, I decided, I will try my fate. If I could only get Arlene away where we could be alone. How is it she always managed to have someone else around? Tomorrow, I will know from her own lips whether or not my affections are in vain, and whether I must return to America alone. Charming music. The full moon threw her clear light upon the space directly under my window. I could distinguish every object as distinctly as in broad daylight. I listened and watched. It was as though I waited for something terrible which yet must be. The noise of the wheels grew louder, and then there slid into the full length of the moon a rude wooden cart drawn by a lean, dappled nag and driven by a hunched-up individual who drew rein as the wagon came directly under my window. With a quick motion of his head, the driver turned a saturnine face to the moon's rays, revealing glittering eyes that shone with terrible, concentrated malignancy. The thinly curling lips parted, and then spit out the sickening cry I had heard a few minutes earlier. But this time the words were clearer, plainer to the ear. Bring out your dead. Bring out your dead. As I strained to watch the scene below, I heard a groan from the next room that must have come from Lord Melverson. Suddenly, there rose from the shadows of the abbey 2 figures bearing between them a burden. They carried it to the cart and carelessly tossed it upon the grisly contents of that horrid wagon. Contents that I noted with horror for the first time. And as the white face of the body lay upturned to the moon, a terrible cry welled out from Lord Melverson's bedchamber.
Oh, Albert! Albert, my son, my son!
Lord Melverson! Lord Melverson, are you all right? Jennings!
Mr. Dinsmore?
I heard him cry out. I hope it's nothing serious.
Nothing. Nothing serious. Good night, sir.
Arlene, how is your father? Will Lord Melverson be joining us this morning?
No, it seems he slept rather poorly and instructed me to report that he will breakfast in his own room. Oh, Kenneth, I'm so glad you're here. I'm so worried about Father.
I'm sure it's nothing, my dear.
I hope you're right. He's not himself, Kenneth.
Arlene, while we have a moment alone, before the house wakes...
Mr. Dinsmore!
Jennings, what's the matter?
Master Albert, Mr. Dinsmore, my lord's firstborn son.
What is it? Is my brother here? Jennings?
I can't tell her, sir. Take her to Lord Melverson, sir. I beg of you.
Oh, no, no!
What happened?
He fell, sir.
He what?
The telegram. Something broke on his plane. He died last night, sir. A bit after midnight.
Albert Melverson had fallen from the sky and died. Had that terrible dream, that nightmare from the night before, been a warning? Had it perhaps been so vivid in Lord Melverson's imagination that the scene had been telepathically reproduced before my own eyes? I was puzzled and disturbed beyond words, but I knew the matter must rest until Lord Melverson should of his own free will explain it. In the meantime, there would be Arlene to comfort, who had just lost her dearly beloved and only brother. 2 hours had hardly passed after Albert's death that Lord Melverson broached the subject of his daughter's marriage.
It's this way, my boy. I'm an old man and far from well of late. I'd like to know that Arlene is in safekeeping.
Thank you, sir. I promise you I shall do my utmost to make her happy.
I know you will. I want you to speak to Arlene about an early wedding. Tell her I want to see her married before I have to leave. I have a very powerful reason I cannot tell you, my boy, for Arlene to marry soon. I want to live to see my grandson at her knee, lad, and unless you two marry soon, I shall be powerless to prevent... That is to say, I shall be unable to do something for you both that has been much in my mind of late. It is vital that you marry soon, Kenneth. More I cannot say.
You don't need to say any more. I'll speak to Arlene today. You understand, sir, that my only motive in not urging marriage upon her now has been your recent bereavement.
Of course. But Arlene is too young, too volatile to allow even such a loss to weigh permanently upon her spirits. I think she will yield to you, especially if you make it plain that I want it to be so.
Lord Melverson's words impressed me almost painfully. There was much behind them, much that, I realize, I could not yet demand an explanation of. But the strength of Lord Melverson's request made me sure when I asked Arlene to set an early date for our marriage that she would consent.
I am ready, if Father does not consider it disrespectful to Albert's memory. We intended to marry soon anyway, and I think Albert will be happy to know that I did not let his going interfere. You understand, don't you? Besides, I feel that he is here with us in the Abbey, with Father and me. But there is one thing that I shall insist upon.
Anything, my dear?
I think too much of my brother to lay aside the light mourning that father permitted me to wear instead of heavy black. So if you want to marry me soon, dear, you must wed a bride in gray.
4 months after Albert Melverson had plunged to his death, Arlene, gray-clad like a gentle dove, put her hand into mine, and we were wed. A honeymoon trip that consumed many months took us to America, as I could hardly wait to present my lovely young wife to my family. Then, pursuant to Lord Melverson's wishes, we returned to Melverson Abbey, that the future heir may be born under the ancestral roof. Little Albert became the apple of his grandfather's eye. The old gentleman spent hours watching the cradle the first few months of his grandson's life, and then again in firmly guiding the little fellow's first steps. But always in the background of this ideally happy family lurked a black shadow, Jennings. His pale eyes, full of foreboding, was always stealing terrified looks in secret at the great door. I grew to almost hate the poor old man, merely because I knew that Jennings believed implicitly in the family curse. One morning we were eating a belated meal in the breakfast room. Little Albert was toddling from the outstretched arms of his mother to that of his grandfather.
What a dear! Just look at him go!
That's it, young chap. You'll be a great walker someday.
Come, little Albert. Come to Grandpapa.
Excuse me, my lord.
What is it, Jennings? What's so pressing?
Would your lordship please take a look?
Take a look? Oh, yes, yes, I'll be right behind you.
What on earth are they up to? I have a mind to follow them.
Let them be, dear. Stay and play with little... Kenneth!
I whirled about quickly, but too late to do anything. Albert, toddling to his mother's arms, missed a step, slipped and fell. His tender little head crashed against the granite coping at the edge of the terrace. And even then, I didn't realize what it all meant. It was not until late that night that I suddenly understood that the Melverson curse was not some silly tradition, but a terrible blight upon the happiness of the Melverson family. Root and branch! Why didn't you tell me? You hid it from me!
I thought I was doing it for the best, Kenneth.
But if you had told me, I would have never left him alone for a single moment. I would have been beside him to save him when he fell.
You know, if he had not fallen, something else would have happened to him, something unforeseen.
Oh, yes. I know now, when it's too late. My little boy, my Arlene's firstborn, the firstborn of Melverson. Why didn't you tell me that the Melverson curse would follow my wife? That it would strike down her firstborn boy?
Would that have deterred you from marrying Arlene? You know it wouldn't, Kenneth. I tried to put the hypothetical case to you once, but you replied that you refused to consider the mere possibility. What was I to do? I will confess, I too have suffered, thinking I should have insisted upon your reading the family records before you married Arlene. Then you could have decided for yourself.
Does Arlene know?
No. I've shielded her from the knowledge.
I can't forgive you for not letting me know. It might have saved Albert's life. If Arlene, too, had known.
Why should I have told her something that would have cast a shadow over her young life? Are you reproaching me because I've tried to keep her happy?
Oh, Father, I didn't mean to reproach you. I'm sorry. You must understand that I'm half mad with the pain of what's happened. Not only on account of Albert, but for Arlene. Oh, if there was only some way of saving him!
There is a way, I believe, but don't put too much stress on what may be but a groundless hope on my part. I have had an idea for some time I shall put into expression tonight. I've been thinking it over since I felt I had wronged you in not pressing home the reality of the Melverson curse. If my idea is a good one, our little Albert is saved, and not only he, but I too shall have broken the curse, rendered it impotent forever.
Is it anything I can do?
Nothing, unless perhaps you want to read the old manuscript in my desk drawer. It tells why we Melversons have been cursed since the days of the Great Plague of 1664. Just before midnight, be in little Albert's room. If he is no better when the clock strikes 12, why then my plan will have been a poor one. But I shall have done all I can do, have given all that lies in my power to give in my attempt to wipe out the wrong I have inadvertently done you. You've been a good husband to my girl, Kenneth. You've made her happy. And in case anything were to happen to me, will you tell Arlene I am perfectly contented if only our little one recovers. I want no vain regrets.
What could happen?
Oh, nothing. That is, you know I've had several heart attacks of late.
Back in 1664, the then Lord Melverson fell madly in love with the charming daughter of a goldsmith. She was an only child, very lovely to look upon, and she dearly loved the young nobleman. But a Melverson of Melverson Abbey, though he could love, could not wed a child of the people. Charles Melverson pleaded with the lovely girl to elope with him, but the damsel, being of lofty soul, called her father and related all. She then turned upon her astonished suitor and left him, while the goldsmith laughed in his face. A Melverson was not one to let such a matter rest quietly, however. At last, one day as she returned from the church, he caught her up and fled with her on his swift charger. Still, she remained obdurate, although love for him was eating at her wounded heart. Receive him she must, but she continued to refuse him so little a request as a single word. It was the terrible winter of 1664. The Black Death was taking a dreadful toll of lives. Hundreds of diseased bodies were daily cast into common graves. One cold, bitter evening, after a long search for his daughter, the goldsmith staggered onto the abbey grounds. He fell under the very window of the chamber where she was kept. Retainers without shouted at one another to beware the plague-stricken man. Their shouts attracted the attention of the maiden. She looked down and beheld her father dying, suffering the last throes of the dreaded pestilence. She finally spoke and demanded freedom to go down to her dying father. Melverson refused the request and held her fast, lest she would fling herself desperately down upon the blackening body of the dying man. Lifting darkening eyes, the poor goldsmith saw his lost daughter, apparently clasped in her lover's arms. How was he to have known that her frantic struggles had been in vain? With his last breath, he cursed the Melversons, lifting discolored hands to the brazen, glowing sky, and declared,
"May the demon of the plague grant that I may come back, as long as a Melverson draws breath to steal away his firstborn son."
And, with an emptying groan, he died. Down through the centuries, the curse had worked its evil way, and no one seems to have found a way of eluding it. Upon the last pages of the old manuscript were noted, in differing hand, the death dates of one Melverson after another, with each the terribly illuminating note: firstborn son died before his majority. And, last of all, in the handwriting of Lord Melverson, was written the name of that Albert for which my son had been named. I tossed the sin-stained papers back into the drawer and shut them from sight. I felt as if my very hands had been polluted by their touch. I glanced at the clock. It was on the point of striking midnight. Remembering Lord Melverson's request, I ran quickly upstairs to my little dying son's room. Arlene was already at the child's side. Nurse and physician stood in the background, their faces showing plainly the hopelessness of the case. I knew these next few moments would determine my son's life or death. And it will be death unless Lord Melverson had found a way to break the curse. On his little pillow, our son Albert drew short, painful breaths. I saw in Arlene's eyes desperation, that she had, in anticipation, given up on her child, her baby, our firstborn. What was that? I went unobtrusively to the window and looked out. I had to see, at all costs, that nightmare dead wagon with its ghastly freight. I had to know whether or not I dreamed it the night before Albert Melverson's plane fell from the sky. Coming out of the shadows of the enveloping trees, rumbled the dead wagon. I turned to glance back into the room. No, I was not dreaming. I had not dreamed before. It was real as such a ghastly thing could be. And then the hateful driver lifted his malignant face to the full light of the moon. His glance met my intent gaze with a scoffing smile of satisfied hatred. The thin lips parted, and their grating cry fell another time upon the heavy silence of the night.
Bring out your dead! Bring out your dead!
There was the unexpected sharp explosion of a revolver. And then, as anticipated, I watched with horror as the ghostly pallbearers emerged from the shadows. They came, but they were carrying what seemed to be a heavy burden. That was no child's tiny form they tossed upon the dead cart.
Kenneth, come here, look. He's breathing easier. Doctor, look. Tell me, doesn't he seem better?
I consider it a little short of a miracle. Madam, your child will live. I congratulate you both.
Oh, I must tell Father, Kenneth. He will be so happy. Dear Father.
Mr. Dinsmore,
Yes, Jennings. What is it?
would you follow me into the hallway, sir? He's gone, Mr. Dinsmore. Break it to her easy, sir. But it's proud of him, she ought to be. 'Twas not the little master that carried away on the accursed dead wagon. Thanks to him.
The gunshot!
I tried to stop him, sir. Forgive me. I loved him. But he would make the sacrifice. He said it was worth trying. And so, he did it.
But he's broken the curse. He's broken the curse!
Thank you, thank you, thank you. That was the dead wagon. Tonight, the role of Kenneth was portrayed by Hunter Johnson. The role of Arlene was portrayed by Josie Gunn. The role of Jennings and Driver was performed by Joseph Harmon. Sound effects supplied by Lastacia Cloyd and Emily Brown. The role of Lord Melverson and the Doctor portrayed by yours truly. Let's give us all another great big Dogwood Radio Mystery Theater round of applause. You have been listening to King University Department of Theater and the Twin City Radio Theater's production of the Dogwood Radio Mystery Theater, coming to you live from the campus of King University. Apparently, we need to clear up a discrepancy in terminology and nomenclature. What we have discovered is that even though some folks insist on referring to Bigfoot as Sasquatch, others prefer to call him the Abominable Snowman, and still others use that term wood booger. Yet he doesn't mind. Yet he doesn't mind.
It's a bad joke, Steve.
Our third and final production for this evening is entitled From the Dead, written by Edith Nesbit in 1880 and first published in the Illustrated London News, September 8, 1892. And now, From the Dead.
True or not, Miss Helmont, your brother is a scoundrel. No man, no decent man, tells such things.
He did not tell me, Arthur. How dare you suppose it? I found the letter in his desk, and she being my friend and you being her lover, I never thought there could be any harm in my reading her letter to my brother. Give me back the letter. I was a fool to tell you.
Not yet. Dear Oscar, I do love you, but it is impossible. I must marry Arthur. My honor is engaged. If he would only set me free. But he never will. He loves me so foolishly. But as for me, it is you I love, body, soul, and spirit. There is no one in my heart but you. I think of you all day and dream of you all night, and we must part, and that is the way of the world. Goodbye. Yours, Elvira.
Well, do you give me no thanks?
You put a knife into my heart, and then you ask for thanks?
Pardon me. I have done nothing but show you the truth. For that, one should expect no gratitude. May I ask, out of mere curiosity, what you intend to do?
Your brother will tell you.
You will not tell my brother!
That you have read his private letters? Certainly not.
Why are you so angry with me? What else could I do?
I don't know.
Would it have been right not to tell you?
I don't know. I only know that you've put the sun out, and I haven't got used to the dark yet.
Believe me, Arthur, believe me, she never loved you.
I beg your pardon. I have behaved very badly. You are quite right to come, and I am not ungrateful. Goodbye, and thank you, Miss Helmont.
Goodbye, Arthur.
As the door closed behind her, I sank into my chair, and I am not ashamed to say that I cried like a child, or a fool over my lost plaything. The little dark-haired woman who loved someone else with body, soul, and spirit. I did not hear the door open or any foot on the floor, and therefore I started when a voice behind me said,
Are you so very unhappy? Oh, dear Arthur, don't think I am not sorry for you.
I don't want anyone to feel sorry for me, Miss Helmont. Ida was silent for a moment. Then, with a quick, sudden, gentle movement, she leaned down and kissed my forehead. And I heard the door softly close. Then I knew that the beautiful Miss Ida Helmont loved me. But the next day, reason woke and said, was Miss Helmont speaking the truth? Was it possible that I determined to see Elvira, to know from her own lips whether by happy fortune this blow came not from her, but from a woman whom in love might have killed honesty? I walked from Hampstead to Gower Street. As I trod its long length, I saw a figure in pink come out of one of the houses. It was Elvira. She walked in front of me to the corner of Store Street. There she met Oscar Helmont. They turned and met face to face, and I saw all I needed to see. They loved each other. Ida Helmont had spoken the truth. I bowed and passed on. Before 6 months were gone, they were married, and before a year was over, I had married Ida Helmont. I loved Ida as I have never loved Elvira. Let no one doubt that I loved her, as I will never love again. There was never anyone like her. She was brave and beautiful, witty and wise, and by all measures adorable. She was the only woman in the world. There was a frankness about her, a largeness of heart, that made all other women seem small and contemptible. She loved me, and I worshipped her. I married her. I spent 3 golden weeks with her, and then I left her. Why? Because she told the truth. It was one night, late. We had sat all evening in the veranda of our seaside lodging, watching the moonlight on the water and listening to the soft sound of the sea on the sand. I have never been so happy. I will never be so happy again.
Heart, how much do you love me?
How much?
Yes, how much? I want to know what place it is I hold in your heart. Am I more to you than anyone else?
My love.
More than yourself.
More than my life.
I believe you. It can make no difference then. Nothing in heaven or earth can come between us now.
Nothing, my sweet. But what is it?
I must tell you. I cannot hide anything now from you because I am yours. Body, soul, and spirit. Arthur, you remember my coming to you at Hampstead with that letter?
Yes, my sweet, and I remember how you...
Arthur, that letter was a forgery. She never wrote it.
She stopped, for I had risen and flung her hands from me and stood looking at her. God help me! I thought it was anger at the lie I felt. I know now it was only wounded vanity, that I should have been tricked, that I should have been deceived, that I should have been led on to make a fool of myself, that I should have married the woman who befooled me. At that moment she was no longer the woman that I adored. She was only a woman who had forged a letter and tricked me into marrying her. I spoke. I denounced her. I said I would never speak to her again. I said I would have no more to do with a liar and a forger. I don't know whether I expected her to creep to my knees and implore forgiveness. I think I had some vague idea that I could by and by consent with dignity to forgive and forget. I did not mean what I said. I did not mean a word of it. While I was saying it, I was longing for her to weep and fall at my feet, that I might raise her and hold her in my arms again. She did not fall at my feet. She stood quietly, looking at me.
Arthur, let me explain.
There is nothing to explain. You are a liar and a forger, and that is enough for me. I will never speak to you again. You have wrecked my life!
Do you mean that? Do you mean it?
Mean it? Yes, of course I mean it. Don't touch me, please. You have ruined my life!
Goodbye, Arthur.
She turned away, went into our room, and shut the door. I longed to follow her, tell her if there was anything to forgive, I forgave it. Instead, I walked out to the beach and walked away under the cliffs. The moonlight and the solitude presently brought me to a better mind. Whatever she had done had been for love of me, I know that. True, my idea of her was shattered, but even as she was, what was the whole world of women compared to her? I hurried back, but in my evil temper I had walked far. It had been 3 hours by the time I opened the door of the dark, still little house where we were lodged. I crept up the narrow stairs and opened the door of our room softly. Perhaps she cried herself to sleep, and perhaps I could wake her with my kisses and beg her to forgive me. I went into the room. I went towards the bed. She was not there. She was not in the room, and one glance showed me she was not in the house. After wasting a priceless hour searching for her, I found a note on the dressing table.
Goodbye, Arthur. Make the best of what is left of your life. I shall spoil it no more.
She was gone. Utterly gone. I rushed to town by the earliest morning train, only to find that her family, her friends, knew nothing of her. Advertisement failed. The only responses I received were from a tramp that said he met a white lady on the cliff, and a fisherman who brought me a handkerchief marked with her name that he had found on the beach. I searched the country far and wide, but I had to go back to London at last. And the months went by. I won't say much about those months, because even the memory of that suffering turns me faint and sick at heart. The police and press failed me utterly. Her friends could not help me, and, more so ever, wildly indignant with me, especially her brother. I don't know how I got through those long weeks and months. Day and night, I almost saw her face, almost heard her voice. I took long walks in the country, and her figure was always just round the next turn of the road, the next glade of the wood. But I never quite saw her. I never quite heard her. I believe I was not altogether sane at that time. At last, one morning, as I was setting out for one of those long walks, I met a telegraph boy. I took the red envelope from his hand. On the pink paper inside was written,
Come to me at once. I am dying. You must come. Ida, Appenshaw Farm, Mellor, Derbyshire.
There was a train at 12 to Marple, the nearest station. I took it. I tell you, there are some things that cannot be spoken about. My life for those long months was one of them, that journey another. What had her life been for those months? That question troubled me. But the overmastering sensation was joy, intense, unspeakable joy. She was alive! I could see her again. I took out the telegram and looked at it. I am dying. I simply did not believe it. She could not die until she had seen me. And if she had lived all those months without me, she could live now, when I was with her again, when she knew of the hell I had endured apart from her, and the heaven of our meeting. She must live. She could not die. Following the train, there was a long drive over bleak hills, dark, jolting, and infinitely wearisome. At last, we stopped before a long, low building, where one or two lights gleamed faintly. I sprang out and ran up the path to the door. A blaze of light made me blink and draw back.
Are you Arthur Marsh?
Yes.
Then you're too late. She's dead.
I went into the house, walked to the fire, held my hands out to it mechanically. For, though the night was warm, I was cold to the bone. There were some folks standing round the fire, and lights flickering. Then an old woman came out and offered me tea. I burst out laughing. It was too funny. I had traveled over 200 miles to see her, and she was dead, and they offered me tea? They drew back from me as if I was some kind of wild beast, but I could not stop laughing. Then a hand was laid on my shoulder, and someone led me into a dark room, lighted a lamp, set me in a chair, and sat down opposite me.
I was Miss Ida's nurse. Who are you?
Her husband.
Then may God forgive you. What you've done, I don't know, but it'll be hard work forgiving you, even for him.
Tell me, my wife.
Tell you? Tell you? Yes, I'll tell you. Your wife was not ashamed of you. She never so much as told me she was married. She let me think anything I pleased sooner than that. She just come here and she said, "Nurse, take care of me, for I am in mortal trouble. And don't let them know where I am," says she. And me being well married to an honest man and well-to-do here, I was able to do it by the blessing.
Why didn't you send for me before?
I'd never sent for you. It was her doing. Oh, to think as God Almighty's made men able to measure out such trouble for us women folk. Young man, I don't know what you did to her to make her leave you, but it must have been something cruel, for she loved the ground you walked on. She used to sit day after day, looking at your picture and talking to it and kissing of it and crying till she made me cry too. She used to cry all night almost. And one day when I tells her to pray to God to help her through her trouble, she has with your putty face on a card, she does, and says she with her poor little smile, "That's my God, nurse," she says.
Don't. Not anymore. Not now.
Don't! Don't indeed. No, I won't, but I shan't forget you. I tell you, I've had you in my prayers time and again, and I shan't drop you out of them now. I know she was your unwedded wife, as you chucked away when you tired of her and left her to eat her heart out with longing. Oh, I pray for you. I pray to God above that you pay dearly for all you done to her. Can't you feel nothing? Are you made of stone? Come and look at her lying there so quiet. She don't fret after the likes of you no more. She won't sit no more looking out the window and saying nothing, only dropping her tears slow one by one. Come and see her. Come and see what you done to my pretty, and then you can go. Nobody wants you here. She don't want you now. But perhaps you'd like to see her safe underground first. I'll be bound you'll put a big slab on her to make sure she don't rise again from the
Woman, have mercy!
What's that?
Have mercy.
Mercy? You should have thought of that before. You had no mercy on her. She loved you. She died loving you, and if I wasn't a Christian woman, I'd kill you for it like the rat you are. That I would, though I'd swing for it afterwards.
Don't you understand? We loved each other. She died loving me. I have to live loving her. And it's her you pity. I tell you, it was all a mistake. A stupid, stupid mistake. Take me to her. And for pity's sake, let me be left alone with her.
Well, come along then. This way, young man. Here.
What's that?
Your child.
What?
She always said she'd send for you when she got over her trouble. I'd like him to see his little baby, nurse, she says. Our little baby. It'll be all right when the baby's born, she says. I know he'll come to me then. You'll see. And I never said nothing. Not thinking you'd come if she was your leavings, and not dreaming as you could be her husband and could stay away from her being as she was.
I have a child. Is he...
She. Hush.
She opened the door, and I followed her in. It was a large, dark room. There were wax candles and brass candlesticks, and the smell of lavender. The big four-post bed was covered with white. I stood by the bedside. I looked down on my wife's face just so I had seen it lie on the pillow beside me in the early morning. She did not look like one dead. Her lips were still red, and it seemed to me that a tinge of color lay upon her cheek. It seemed to me, too, that if I kissed her, she would wake and put her slight hand on my neck and lay her cheek against mine, and we should tell each other everything and weep together and understand and be comforted. So I stood and laid my lips to her as the old nurse stole from the room. But the red lips were like marble, and she did not wake. She will not wake now or evermore. They had dragged me at last from the bedside of my Ida. They fed me, I believe, and laid me in a bed adjacent to where my wife lay. I heard the household noises grow fewer and die out, the little wail of my child sounding latest. Earlier, they had brought the child to me, and I had held it in my arms and bowed over to its tiny face and frail fingers. I did not love it then. I told myself it had cost me her life. But my heart told me it was I that did that. The tall clock at the stairhead sounded the hours. 11, 12, 1, and still I could not sleep. Now I lay still as the dead woman in the next room, and looked at what was left of my life. I lay still, and thought, and thought, and thought. It must have been about 2 that I first become aware of a slight sound that was not the ticking of the clock. I say I first become aware, and yet I knew perfectly that I had heard that sound more than once before, and had yet determined not to hear it, because it came from the next room, the room where the corpse lay. And I did not wish to hear that sound, because I knew it meant that I was nervous, miserably nervous, a coward and a brute. It meant that I, having killed my wife, as surely as though I put a knife in her breast, had now sunk so low as to be afraid of her dead body. The dead body that lay in the room next to mine. The heads of the beds were placed against the same wall, and from that wall I had fancied I heard slight, almost inaudible sounds. So when I say I become aware of them, I mean that I at last heard a sound so distinct as to leave no room for doubt or question. It brought me to a sitting position in my bed, and the drops of sweat gathered heavily on my forehead and fell on my cold hands as I held my breath and listened. I don't know how long I sat there. There was no further sound. At last, my tense muscles relaxed, and I fell back to the pillow. "You fool!" I said to myself. "Dead or alive, is she not your darling? Your heart's heart? Would you not go near to die of joy if she come to you? I wish she would come, I answered myself in words, while every fiber of my body and mind shrank in denial. I lighted a candle and breathed more freely as I looked at the commonplace details of an ordinary room. Then I thought of her, lying alone, so near me, so quiet under the white sheet. She was dead. She would not wake or move. But suppose she did move? Suppose she turned back the sheet and got up and walked across the floor and turned the door handle? As I thought it, I heard plainly, unmistakably heard, the door of the chamber of death open. I heard the touch of hands on my door outside, uncertain hands that felt for the latch.
Arthur!
Sick with terror, I lay clenching the sheet in my hands. I knew well enough what would come in when that door opened, that door on which my eyes were fixed. I dreaded to look, yet I dared not turn away my eyes.
Arthur!
The door hand opened slowly, 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 and the figure of my dead wife came in. It came straight towards the bed and stood at the bed foot in its white grave clothes. There was a scent of lavender. Its eyes were wide open and looked at me with love unspeakable. I could have shrieked aloud.
You aren't afraid of me, darling, are you?
How can...
I heard all you said to me when you came, but I couldn't answer. But I've come back from the dead to tell you I wasn't really so bad as you thought me. Elvira had told me she loved Oscar. I only wrote the letter to make it easier for you. You'll love me again now, won't you? One always forgives the dead. Say you love me. Say you love me again.
Yes, I love you. I have always loved you. God help me.
I suppose you would be afraid now that I am dead if I came round to you, my sweet Arthur, and laid my hand on your neck.
I don't know.
And put my cheek against yours.
No.
And kissed you?
Then I did shriek aloud, again and again, and covered my face with the sheet, and wound it round my head and body, and held it with all my force. There was a moment's silence. Then...
Goodbye, Arthur.
I heard the sound of feet and voices, and I thought I heard something heavy fall. I disentangled my head from the sheet. My room was empty. Then reason come back to me. I leaped from the bed and sprung to the door. Ida, my darling, come back. I am not afraid. I love you. Come back. Come back. As I flung the door open, someone was bringing a light along the passage. On the floor, outside the door of the death chamber, was huddled the corpse in its grave clothes. Dead. 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 She is buried in Mella churchyard, and there is no stone over her. Now, whether it was catalepsy, as the doctor said. Oh, whether my love come back from the dead to me, who loved her, I shall never know. But this I know, that if I had held out my arms to her as she stood at my bed foot, if I had said yes, even from the grave, my darling, from hell itself, come back to me. If I had had room in my coward's heart for anything but the unreasoning terror that killed love in that hour, I should not be here alone. I shrank from her. I feared her. I would not take her into my heart. And now she will not come to me any more. Why do I go on living? You see, there is this child. She is 4 years old now, and she has never spoken, and she has never smiled.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. That was From the Dead. The role of Arthur tonight was portrayed by Hunter Johnson. Ida by Josie Gunn? No. Who are you? Rebecca Rowe, yes. The nurse by Josie Gunn. There she is. Sound effects replied by Lastacia Cloyd and Emily Brown. And The Man at the Door by Joseph Harmon. Let's bring everyone out for one more great big Dogwood Mystery Radio Theater round of applause. Thank you and good night. Thank